As we know, parts of Lilian Ngoyi Street, formerly known as Bree Street, Johannesburg CBD, collapsed, of course, yesterday following an explosion. One person has died and over 40 people were injured. It is alleged that acid mine drainage could have been the cause of the explosion. For more on this, Professor Terrence McCarthy from Wits School of Geoscience joins me now. Thank you so much, Prof, for joining us this afternoon. Now, of course, there's been a lot of speculation as to what exactly caused this explosion. Last night, when my colleague Heidi Jockers was, on the ground, she was covering the story for us. She said the first thing that she said that I noticed was, she said it smells like rotten eggs, almost like something that's rotting. And the first thing that came to my mind was, that's usually the smell of sulfur. So when it comes to this underground explosion that we're talking about, could this possibly be a buildup of gas? Or from your knowledge, what do you think this could be?
Well, thanks very much, Darren, for inviting me to participate in this discussion. First of all, it's the idea that it could be caused by acid mine drainage is far off the beam. It's very unlikely that acid mine drainage could result in an explosion like this, because remember, acid mine drainage is really just a very dilute solution of sulfuric acid. You can buy it at any hardware store. Some people use it in their swimming pools. So it's not inherently explosive. It's just not an explosive. And that's the first thing. The second thing is that there's a lot of acid mine drainage which is produced by one of the minerals associated with gold, which is a mineral called pyrite, iron sulfide, and that then reacts with oxygen and it forms sulfuric acid. So there's a natural sulfuric acid factory going on in the mine tailings, the old mine dumps. And that's generating sulfuric acid, and that's really the problem with our environment. It contaminates the water, and it also dissolves other metals. When the water becomes acidic, it dissolves other metals which are themselves toxic, like copper and nickel and so on. So that's the big source of the problem with acid mine drainage, is this toxic water that it produces, but it's not explosive. The other thing is that the mining in Johannesburg commenced obviously in 1886, but the mining actually started close to where the M2 motorway is now. And the mines went down, the rocks containing the gold dip at an angle, and they dip towards the south. So they progressively mined further and further towards the south. So the bulk of the mining activity was actually south of the M2 motorway. In that area around Bree Street, there was no mining. Because the mines were actually quite far away from there in those days anyway. It's a good few city blocks. So it's very unlikely that there's any kind of mining activity in the near vicinity of Bree Street. So I think it looks like it's an underground explosion in a cavity, and it looks like the cavity must have extended along Bree Street, underneath Bree Street. So that could be a stormwater drain, or it could be one of those tunnels that are used to supply electricity to the buildings, or it could be a sewage line, large sewage pipe. So it's gas that's accumulated in there, and something caused it to ignite, and we see the result. But it's very much confined to the street. And the fact that the explosion lifted huge slabs of tar suggests that the pipe was relatively shallow, and there wasn't much fragmentation of the material. It simply just lifted the road surface up, which suggests that it was quite a long and possibly fairly deepish pipe, a few meters perhaps. So that's my view of it. Certainly, it's not an acid mine drainage phenomenon at all.
So if we are ruling out acid mine drainage, then these fractures or that you just mentioned, is it then possible that something like this could happen again in that area?
Look, it depends. I mean, if it is related to the gas supply, there's obviously a massive system of pipes that carry gas around in the city. I don't know whether those pipes extend under the central business district. They certainly extend out into the suburbs. My house, for example, I live in Parkhurst. I use town gas. It used to be supplied by the gasworks, which was situated in Cottesloe next to the Wits University, but now is obtained from Sasol. I believe it actually comes from Mozambique. But in any event, they pipe it around, and people use it for primarily for heating, water heating and and space heating, like warming rooms and so on. Now, if those pipes leak, then obviously there's a risk of explosion, because they leak into a space, and once the gas reaches a certain critical concentration, if there's any spark, it will ignite, and we'll have an explosion like we had in Bree Street. But that gas can leak into any open space. It could leak into a stormwater drain or into a sewage pipe. So there are a variety of possibilities. But that will come out, in the fullness, when they open up the holes and have a look and see where the explosion actually took off underground,
Yeah, and it is very important to find the root cause of this. But I just want to come back to, the smell of the gases. How do you distinguish, what kind of gas is in the area? Then, because for me, I think it's a huge concern if we don't exactly know what kind of gas we are dealing with here. Then, could possibly be a health risk for the people in the area. So, is it important for us to determine the kind of gas that's being released there? Like I said, my colleague did mention, and a few other people as well in the area, that there is a stench of rot. So how do we combat that factor?
Yeah, look, normally with gas that's being used for, that's being piped into residential areas and even into industrial areas, the suppliers add a very strong smelling chemical to the gas. Because the gas itself is inherently completely odorless. You won't smell it at all. So they put in this very strong smelling substance, which you notice when you're exposed to that gas. Acid mine drainage, like sulfuric acid, has no smell at all. But occasionally, if you have a partial conversion of the mineral pyrite into sulfuric acid, you can get instances where you release hydrogen H2S, and that's the smell of rotting smell, the so-called rotting egg smell, which you sometimes get associated with acid mine drainage. But it's not a common feature. Normally it's completely odorless.
And would you say it's important for people to evacuate the areas just to be safe, until we exactly know, what gases are being released and what the cause of the problem is?
I think it would be advisable to, keep people out, but particularly to find out as quickly as possible what actually went wrong there. So to me, that's keep people away from the immediate area of the blast, and get the experts in there to find out exactly what went wrong. Because, as you say, it could easily happen again if there's a long pipe with several leaks along its length. There could be somewhere else where the same gas concentration is building up, and there is potentially another explosion. So I would say find out what it is quickly and take steps to mitigate, and then the people can go back there. It looks to me like the damage is confined to the road surface, and not the buildings on either side. I suspect that they're going to be sound.
Yeah, and
the foundations are deep enough to have protected them.
Yeah, and when we talk about infrastructural, damage, and we know the Joburg CBD, there's a lot of infrastructure damage, and we need this to be fixed because of historical reasons as well. So, from your expert opinion, would you say that this is something that definitely needs to be looked at, just in order for us to prevent something from this happening again in the future?
Look, it's a problem of maintenance. These things have everything that we build as people has a design life, and what that means is that as an infrastructure approaches a certain design life, then it's got to be replaced, and that applies to a water pipe, a gas line, electricity supply, and so on. These things have to be replaced, and unfortunately, I suspect the rate of growth of the economy has been so rapid, the growth of the population has been so rapid, that the maintenance has been put on a bit of a back burner because of new developments that are required. We've got to build new suburbs rather than fix the old ones and restore the old infrastructure. There's obviously some effort that goes on, but you see it, for example, in my neighborhood. The overhead wires that used to supply the electricity have all been replaced now with modern, thicker plastic-clad wires, but the wires that actually deliver the electricity from the pole down into the house would have been laid in the 1920s, and they're still there. So those are the things that they date back to the time before plastics were invented. So they don't have any plastic at all. The wires are insulated with paper dipped in tar, and then that's wrapped in a cloth fabric, and then that's dipped in tar, and then that's bound in a steel strip is wound around the outside. And you can recognize them easily by the fact that they have a steel strip around them. And the majority of houses in this neighborhood are connected like that, and that probably applies to all the old suburbs,
Yeah.
So it's that kind of infrastructure. The sewage pipes are all made of clay, and again, they were laid. This suburb where I live was laid out in 1906. So the sewage line systems here were laid out probably in about mid-1930s or early 1930s, and we're still using them today. And the other thing is, they've added all these extra buildings, through the expansion, for example, of places like Rosebank, and they add these new buildings, but they don't replace the sewage systems. So these systems are going to handle more and more and more. So, it's inevitable that one's going to have problems like this. It's
Very important.
Inevitable.
Very important fact that you mentioned there at the end. Thank you so much. That was Professor Terrence McCarthy from Wits School of Geoscience, just giving us his expert opinion on the explosion that occurred yesterday around 5 p.m. in the Johannesburg CBD.